Talk. Enters Parliament. 1832 to 1834. I may speak of the House of Commons as a school of discipline for those who enter it. In my opinion, it is a school of extraordinary power and efficacy. It is a great and noble school for the creation of all the qualities of force, suppleness, and versatility of intellect. And it is also a great moral school. It is a school of temper. It is also a school of patience. It is a school of honor, and it is a school of justice. Gladstone, 1878. Foreign travel. Leaving home in the latter part of January, 1832, with a Wordsworth for a pocket companion, Mr. Gladstone made his way to Oxford, where he labored through his packing, settled accounts, heard a very able sermon indeed from Newman at St. Mary's, took his bachelor's degree, January 26, and after a day or two with relatives and friends in London, left England along with his brother John at the beginning of February. He did not return until the end of July. He visited Brussels, Paris, Florence, Naples, Rome, Venice, and Milan. Of this long journey he kept a full record, and it contains one entry of no small moment in his mental history. A conception now began to possess him, that according to one religious school kindled a saving illumination, and according to another threw something of a shade upon his future path. In either view it marked a change of spiritual course, a transformation not of religion as the center of his being, for that it always was, but of the frame and mold within which religion was to expand. In entering St. Peter's at Rome, March 31, 1832, he experienced his first conception of unity in the Church, and first longed for its visible attainment. Here he felt the pain and shame of the schism which separates us from Rome, whose guilt surely rests not upon the venerable fathers of the English Reformed Church but upon Rome itself, yet whose melancholy effects the mind is doomed to feel when you enter this magnificent temple and behold in its walls the images of Christian saints and the words of everlasting truth. Yet such is the mass of intervening encumbrances that you scarcely own, and can yet more scantily realize, any bond of sympathy or union. This was no fleeting impression of a traveler. It had been preceded by a disenchantment, for he had made his way from Turin to Pinerol, and seen one of the Vaudois valleys. He had framed a lofty conception of the people as ideal Christians, and he underwent a chill of disappointment on finding them apparently much like other men. Even the pastor, though a quiet, inoffensive man, gave no sign of energy or of what would have been called in England vital religion. With this chill at his heart he came upon the atmosphere of gorgeous Rome. It was, however, in the words of Clough's fine line from Easter Day, through the great sinful streets of Naples as he passed, that a great mutation overtook him. One Sunday, May 13, something, I know not what, set me on examining the occasional offices of the church and the prayer book. They made a strong impression upon me on that very day, and the impression has never been effaced. I had previously taken a great deal of teaching direct from the Bible, as best I could, but now the figure of the church arose before me as a teacher too, and I gradually found in how incomplete and fragmentary a manner I had drawn divine truth from the sacred volume, as indeed I had also missed in the 39 articles some things which ought to have taught me better. Such, for I believe that I have given the fact as it occurred, in its silence and its solitude, was my first introduction to the august conception of the Church of Christ. It presented to me Christianity under an aspect in which I had not yet known it, its ministry of symbols, its channels of grace, its unending line of teachers joining from the head, a sublime construction, based throughout upon historic fact, uplifting the idea of the community in which we live, and of the access which it enjoys through the new and living way to the presence of the Most High. From this time I began to feel my way by degrees into or towards a true notion of the Church. It became a definite and organized idea when, at the suggestion of James Hope, I read the just published and remarkable work of Palmer. But the charm of freshness lay upon that first disclosure of 1832. This mighty question, what is the nature of a church and what the duties, titles, and symbols of faithful membership, which in diverse forms had shaken the world for so many ages and now first dawned upon his ardent mind, was the germ of a deep and lasting preoccupation of which we shall speedily and without cessation find abundant traces. 2. Offer of a seat. A few weeks later, the great rival interest in Mr. Gladstone's life, if rival we may call it, was forced into startling prominence before him. At Milan he received a letter from Lord Lincoln, saying that he was commissioned by his father, the Duke of Newcastle, to inform him that his influence in the borough of Newark was at Mr. Gladstone's disposal if he should be ready to enter parliamentary life. This was the fruit of his famous anti-reform speech at the Oxford Union. No wonder that such an offer made him giddy. This stunning and overpowering proposal, he says to his father, July 8, naturally left me the whole of the evening on which I received it, in a flutter of confusion. Since that evening there has been time to reflect, and to see that it is not of so intoxicating a character as it seemed at first. First, because the Duke of Newcastle's offer must have been made at the instance of a single person, Lincoln, that person young and sanguine, and I may say in such a matter partial. This much at least became clear to me by the time I had recovered my breath, that decidedly more than mere permission from my dear father would be necessary to authorize my entering on the consideration of particulars at all. And then he falls into a vein of devout reflection, almost as if this sudden destination of his life were some irrevocable priesthood or vow of monastic profession, and not the mere stringent secularity of labor in a parliament. It would be thin and narrow to count all this an overstrain. To a nature like his, of such eager strength of equipment, conscious of life as a battle and not a parade, apt for all external action yet with a burning glow of light and fire in the internal spirit, resolute from the first in small things and in great against aimless drift and eddy, to such an one the moment of fixing alike the goal and the track may well have been grave. Then points of doubt arose. It is, I dare say, in your recollection, this to his father, that at the time when Mr. Canning came to power, the Duke of Newcastle, in the House of Lords, declared him the most profligate minister the country had ever had. Now it struck me to inquire of myself, does the Duke know the feelings I happen to entertain towards Mr. Canning? Does he know, or can he have had in his mind, my father's connection with Mr. Canning? The Duke had in fact been one of the busiest and bitterest of Canning's enemies, and had afterwards in the same spirit striven with might and main to keep Huskisson out of the Wellington cabinet. Another awkwardness appeared. The Duke had offered a handsome contribution towards expenses. Would not this tend to abridge the members' independence? What was the footing on which patron and member were to stand? Mr. Gladstone was informed by his brother that the Duke had neither heretofore asked for pledges, nor now demanded them. After a very brief correspondence with his shrewd and generous father, the plunge was taken, and on his return to England, after a fortnight spent in an amphibious state between that of a candidate and delta iota toeta or private person, he issued his address to the electors of Newark, August 4, 1832. He did not go actually onto the ground until the end of September. The intervening weeks he spent with his family at Torquay, where he varied electioneering correspondence and yachting with plenty of sufficiently serious reading from Blackstone and Plato and the excursion down to Corinne. One Sunday morning, September 23, his father burst into his bedroom, with the news that his presence was urgently needed at Newark. I rose, dressed, and breakfasted speedily, with infinite disgust. I left Torquay at 8 3/4 and devoted my Sunday to the journey. Was I right? My father drove me to Newton, chaise to Exeter. There near an hour, went to the cathedral and heard a part of the prayers. Mail to London. Conversation with a Tory countryman who got in for a few miles, on Sunday travelling, which we agreed in disapproving. Gave him some tracts. Excellent mail. Dined at Yeovil, read a little of the Christian Year, published 1827. At 6:30 a.m. arrived at Piccadilly, 18½ hours from Exeter. Went to Fetter Lane, washed and breakfasted, and came off at 8 o'clock by a high flyer for Newark. The sun hovered red and cold through the heavy fog of London sky, but in the country the day was fine. Tea at Stamford, arrived at Newark at midnight. Such in 40 hours was the first of Mr. Gladstone's countless political pilgrimages. His 2 election addresses are a curious starting point for so memorable a journey. Thrown into the form of a modern program, the points are these: union of church and state, the defense in particular of our Irish establishments, correction of the poor laws, allotment of cottage grounds, adequate remuneration of labor, a system of Christian instruction for the West Indian slaves, but no emancipation until that instruction had fitted them for it, a dignified and impartial foreign policy. The Duke was much startled by the passage about labor receiving adequate remuneration, which unhappily among several classes of our fellow countrymen is not now the case. He did not, however, interfere. The Whig newspapers said roundly of the first of Mr. Gladstone's 2 addresses, that a more jumbled collection of words had seldom been sent from the press. The Tory paper, on the contrary, congratulated the constituency on a candidate of considerable commercial experience and talent. The anti-slavery men fought him stoutly. They put his name into their black schedule with 29 other candidates. They harried him with posers from a pamphlet of his father's, and they met his doctrine that if slavery were sinful the Bible would not have commended the regulation of it, by bluntly asking him on the hustings whether he knew a text in Exodus declaring that he that stealeth a man and selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to death. His father's pamphlets undoubtedly exposed a good deal of surface. We cannot be surprised that any adherent of these standard sophistries should be placed on the blacklist of the zealous soldiers of humanity. The candidate held to the ground he had taken at Oxford and in his election address, and apparently made converts. He had an interview with 40 voters of abolitionist complexion at his hotel, and according to the friendly narrative of his brother, who was present, he shone not only in his powers of conversation, but by the tact, quickness, and talent with which he made his replies, to the thorough and complete satisfaction of Baptists, Wesleyan Methodists, and I may say even, of almost every religious sect. Not one refused their vote. They came forward, and enrolled their names, though before, I believe, they never supported anyone on the Duke's interest. Issues address at Newark. The humors of an election of the ancient sort are a very old story, and Newark had its full share of them. The register contained rather under 1,600 voters on a Scott and lot qualification, to elect a couple of members. The principal influence over about 1/4 of them was exercised by the Duke of Newcastle, who 3 years before had punished the Whigs of the borough for the outrage of voting against his nominee, by serving, in concert with another proprietor, 40 of them with notice to quit. Then the trodden worm turned. The notices were framed, affixed to poles, and carried with bands of music through the streets. Even the audacity of a petition to Parliament was projected. The Duke, whose chief fault was not to know that time had brought him into a novel age, defended himself with the haughty truism, then just ceasing to be true, that he had a right to do as he liked with his own. This clear-cut enunciation of a vanishing principle became a sort of landmark, and gave to his name an unpleasing immortality in our political history. In the high tide of agitation for reform the Whigs gave the Duke a beating, and brought their man to the top of the poll, a Tory being his colleague. Hanley, the Tory, on our present occasion seemed safe, and the fight lay between Mr. Gladstone and Sergeant Wilde, the sitting Whig, a lawyer of merit and eminence, who 18 years later went to the woolsack as Lord Truro. Reform at Newark was already on the ebb. Mr. Gladstone, though mocked as a mere schoolboy, and fiercely assailed as a slavery man, exhibited from the first hour of the fight tremendous gifts of speech and skill of fence. His Red Club worked valiantly. The sergeant did not play his cards skillfully, and pretty early in the long struggle it was felt that the Duke would this time come into his own again. The young student soon showed that his double first class, his love of books, his religious preoccupations, had not unfitted him by a single jot for one of the most arduous of all forms of the battle of life. He proved a diligent and prepossessing canvasser, an untiring combatant, and of course the readiest and most fluent of speakers. Wilde, after hearing him, said sententiously to one of his own supporters, "There is a great future before this young man." The rather rotten borough became suffused with the radiant atmosphere of Olympus. The ladies presented their hero with a banner of red silk, and an address expressive of their conviction that the good old red cause was the salvation of their ancient borough. The young candidate in reply speedily put it in far more glowing colors. It was no trivial banner of a party club, it was the red flag of England that he saw before him, the symbol of national moderation and national power, under which, when every throne on the continent had crumbled into dust beneath the tyrannous strength of France, mankind had found sure refuge in triumphant hope, and the blast that tore every other ensign to tatters served only to unfold their own and display its beauty and its glory. Amid these oratorical splendors, the old hands of the club silently supplemented eloquence and argument by darker agencies, of which happily the candidate knew little until after. There was a red band and each musician received 15 shillings a day, there happening accidentally to be among them no fewer than 10 patriotic red plumpers. Large tea parties attracted red ladies. The inns great and small were thrown joyously open on one side or other, and when the time came, our national heroes from Robin Hood to Lord Nelson and the Duke of Wellington, as well as half the animal kingdom, the swan and salmon, horses, bulls, boars, lions, and eagles, of all the colors of the rainbow and in every kind of strange partnership, sent in bills for meat and liquor supplied to free and independent electors to the tune of a couple of £1,000. Apart from these black arts, and apart from the Duke's interest, there was a good force of the staunch and honest type, the lifeblood of electioneering and the salvation of party government, who cried stoutly, "I was born red, I live red, and I will die red." "We started on the canvass," says one who was with Mr. Gladstone, "at 8 in the morning and worked at it for about 9 hours, with a great crowd, band and flags, and innumerable glasses of beer and wine all jumbled together, then a dinner of 30 or 40, with speeches and songs until say 10 o'clock, then he always played a rubber of whist, and about 12 or 1 I got to bed and not to sleep." Humors of an old election. At length the end came. At the nomination the show of hands was against the Reds, but when the poll was taken and closed on the second day, Gladstone appeared at the head of it with 887 votes, against 798 for his colleague Hanley, and 726 for the fallen Wilde. Yesterday, December 13, 1832, he tells his father, "We went to the town hall at 9 a.m., when the mayor cast up the numbers and declared the poll." While he was doing this, the popular wrath vented itself for the most part upon Hanley. "The sergeant obtained me a hearing, and I spoke for perhaps an hour or more, but it was flat work, as they were no more than patient, and agreed with but little that I said. The sergeant then spoke for an hour and a half. He went into matters connected with his own adieu to Newark, besought the people most energetically to bear with their disappointment like men, and expressed his farewell with great depth of feeling. Affected to tears himself, he affected others also. In the evening near 50 dined here, Clinton Arms, and the utmost enthusiasm was manifested. The new member began his first speech as a member of Parliament as follows.